freely.
So the question, I think, was about the Masterpiece Cake Shop case that's before the Supreme Court currently. And basically, if the question is, what are you allowed to do as a religious person, I don't actually view the Masterpiece Cake Shop case as a religious liberty case. I view it as a First Amendment case. And what I mean by that is that my view of your freedom of religion is the same as my view of anyone's behavior in the United States, which is I get to wave my arm around until I hit you in the face. Right? This is the way the government ought to work, that you don't get to make demands on my time or on my labor because that is tyranny. And so I don't think that the religious cake owners ought to have any different rights than, for example, a person who was a speechwriter for President Obama, and now I walk in and I say, I want you to write a speech for me, and they say, I don't want to write a speech for you, I think you're an ass. Right? I think they should have the absolute right to do that. And I think that the cake shop owners, regardless of whether you think they're idiots or whether you think they're religiously true, should have the right to do that. I think that if we're going to have any sort of space for us to communicate, any sort of social fabric at all, we're going to have to acknowledge that there are places where we just have to leave each other alone. And the idea that I can compel you to do something for me makes you the bad guy. So I think that you have, I am a full believer, I'm a libertarian on this. I think that you have the complete right to be as much of an asshole as you want to be, so long as you're not infringing on the rights of others, and you do not have a right to buy a cake from me. Right. So I'm completely libertarian on this, and I also think that you'll go out of business because the person will go across the street to the next bakery and put them out of business. I mean, if you can't find a cake shop that is owned by a gay person in the United States, good luck to you.
It seems like that argument wouldn't have held up in the 60s in the South.
Right. So I think that it actually wouldn't. So So the argument here is twofold. One is, you're right, there are parts of America in which it wouldn't have held up with regard to racism. And the way to actually open that up is to deregulate the market. The reason that Jim Crow laws were Jim Crow laws is because they were laws. They actually had to force people to segregate. So, for example, in Alabama, they had laws that actually required restaurants to have spaces for black people and spaces for white people. Why would you need those laws if people were inherently just going to segregate their own restaurants? The idea here was that there were people who didn't want to segregate their restaurants and had to be forced by the government to do so. Okay, the best example that I can think of here is the Woolworths counter boycott of 1960, in which there was an actual department store with a cafe, is a very famous case, and it was boycotted by black students who sat there at the counter and shut it down. This is before the Civil Rights Act, right? And Woolworths integrated. They said, we're sick of losing the business. In fact, the Montgomery bus boycott, they would have integrated the buses, except for the fact that local regulations prevented them from integrating the buses. So is there discrimination? Of course. Are there bad people? Of course. Is the solution to that for the government to tell people who they can and cannot cater to? I don't think so. I think the solution is for the markets to take care of us and for social pressure to help take care of the problem, which clearly it does. I don't think we have a lack of social pressure in the United States with regard to tolerance and diversity.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to thank you, Sam, for bringing out Ben. I think you two are two of the most important people that should be talking to each other at this moment in history. And as a podcast supporter and a reader, hearing you two argue about free will is exactly what I wanted to hear. So thank you. Although I would love to hear Ben come back on the podcast when I think you have a refresher on his book about the topic. I think you don't fully understand his position. But I'm so glad the first person asked that question, because it's what I was going to ask you about. It's where is that moral threshold for you, Sam and Ben, and where the state interest is there, to where a public business using public waterways, using public roads, using everything that we all contribute to with tax money, must serve the public. Where is that moral threshold where the state can step in and say there is a compelling interest here for you to serve the public, to make the cake if you're in the public?
Well, I actually agree with what Ben said there, except I would acknowledge that there are periods in human history where everyone would benefit from some kind of enlightened pressure coming from the top, right? So you could have leaders and governments who are wiser, certainly earlier than most of the people in the society, and it would be a good thing to just legislate the most important truths there, moral truths. So if you think equality is super important and does good things, political equality, but you have cut, we're talking about India with a caste system, say, it would be good to just remove the caste system, even though most people might still want it if you go back 150 years. But there are moments, and I think now is a moment where I think we pay an unacceptable price for legislating some of these things. And so forcing people to bake a cake seems ridiculous to me, morally and politically now. But if you're going to talk about the civil rights movement and what was appropriated in 1964, I think you could get some kind of local horrible case where there are enough racists for as far as anyone can comfortably walk or drive, so that you have to have the government to legislate some kind of equality, because otherwise nothing's going to change quickly enough to matter. And I don't know where that line is, but the principle is equality is so important that we should enshrine it and enforce it in any way we can. But I would agree with you that most of that now is a matter of talking to one another and using social pressure.
But Ben, it sounds like you're almost saying that we shouldn't have done the Civil Rights Act and just let things work out.
No, we should have. I mean, that was a moment where the market was failing, or I would argue the market was failing. The larger question of just what should be privatized and what should be done by governments. Everything that is best done privately should be done privately, but we should recognize that there are some things that are not best done privately, and we need governments to do those things. And the things on either side of that ledger change depending on the moment in history.
So I'm putting on my lawyer hat with regard to some of this, and one of the things that is a problem is I would obviously agree that America would be better off if in 1964 the federal government were forcing businesses to cater to black folks. But there is such a thing as a clear rule of neutral applicability. And the problem is once you give the government the power to do one thing, that government still has the power to do that thing after times change. And so the question becomes, okay, what does the government have the power to do and what does the government not have the power to do? Sometimes I wish I had the Ring of Power because I have to fight Sauron. Sometimes but does that mean that I should try to steal it and use it for the good, or does it mean I should try to throw it into Mount Doom? And one of the problems that you have here is that the same principle, that the government can force you to accommodate people the government wants you to accommodate, can be used in all sorts of terrible ways, and was used in all sorts of terrible ways. It was the state governments, again, that were re-enshrining segregation. It was not state governments that were showing enlightened leadership from the top. They were doing precisely the reverse at the state level. So it's easy to say that if I were king of the world, this is what I would do. If I were king of the world, I'd do lots of things, but that might also make me a tyrant.
It's the same ring that does good and bad. But...
Yeah, that's right.